On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to JLF's Brave New World. This week, our magazine partner is The Week, Journalism with a Human Touch. Those of you who missed our earlier episode, The Heart of the Matter on Geopolitics, you can catch this on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF, and on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest. As part of the JLF Brave New World Season 1 Redux, we present our second session today, Life Under Lockdown, Alain de Botton in conversation with Anindita Ghosh. Alain de Botton is a Swiss-British writer and philosopher whose essays on love has sold more than 2 million copies. In conversation with Anindita Ghosh, he talks about his life and work and his thoughts on living under lockdown. Alain is the author of 15 books, including How Proust Can Change Your Life and The Consolations of Philosophy. He's also the founder of theschooloflife.com, an organization that publishes books and offers online therapy dedicated to calm and resilience. Anindita Ghosh is the author of Mint Lounge, the award-winning Saturday magazine of the Indian business daily, Mint. All our sessions that have been broadcast till now are available on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. Please do remember to comment by typing it into the comment section below. In case you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. And of course, if we drop off, hang in there and we'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, Life Under Lockdown, Alain de Botton in conversation with Anindita Ghosh.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. Hello, Alain. And hello to everybody, and thank you for joining us here today. Despite being someone who's written 14 books, the first one at the age of 23, I was surprised to learn that Alain de Botton doesn't have a lot of faith in the idea of books. I read an interview where you said you're often struck by the fear that books don't do very much. And I think that's very congruous with the line of thinking that led you to launch School of Life in 2008 with a bunch of colleagues. And School of Life in London helps disseminate ideas in a number of ways, including books, but also those sharp, occasionally hilarious videos that I'm sure most of you have seen. Alain's most recent book published last year is called The School of Life, which he calls a comprehensive guide to the modern art of emotional intelligence, something that I think all of us could do with in these troubled times with the lockdown. So Alain, as head professor in the School of Life, I think it's fair to assume that you've had a good handle on the lockdown, better than most of us. What's your one-line guide to surviving it with your head above water?
Look, I think my one-line guide is we don't need to be particularly sane or particularly calm or particularly in a wonderful mood about this particular crisis. I think we're all allowed to slightly lose our heads. I think that a wise life allows for moments of unwisdom. And I think if there's ever going to be one, this is one of them. So I'm certainly not somebody who would advise that a guru-like distance and perspective on all matters is always either desirable or definitely even possible. So let's not beat ourselves up if during this current crisis we are very worried. To worry about something like this is very normal. Sometimes there is a great pressure on us to seem invulnerable and to suggest that we're okay, that we're able to cope with things that life throws our way. I think that this is a moment when we can admit that maybe we're not coping and that that's okay too in its own way. And let me just say, it's also the fastest route to friendship, you know, because having the courage to reveal fear, loss of control, dignity, composure. This is actually the way in which you connect with somebody. You know, if someone calls you up at this current crisis and says, you know, how are you doing? And you say, I'm fine, I'm just terrific. How are you? You know, this is not the beginning of a friendship. This is almost a hostile act because it's not allowing another person into your life. It's simply denying your humanity because part of all of our humanity is that we are anxious, fragile, out of control, worried. This is part of what it means to be human. But I think what can happen so often is that we think, if I show this side of myself, I will be looking weak, and I will have to feel ashamed of myself, and no one will want to know me. In fact, oddly, the opposite happens. When you are able to gift somebody a part of your own vulnerable self, that is the beginning of a connection and a friendship with someone. And if there is one silver lining to this situation, I don't really know how it is in India, but I think in the UK, the dominant mood is everyone's always fine. That should be the mood of the day. People are very, very reluctant to admit problems or difficulties in their lives. One of the stiff English upper lip is still operative in many, many ways. It's now an ironic lip, but it's still a stiff upper lip. And I think one of the things that this crisis has allowed people to do is to admit to a little bit more of their humanity. So people will say, you know what, I've never been so worried in my life. Or I don't know where the whole thing is going. And so there is a new spirit, oddly, of kindness and tolerance because people are able to reveal more of themselves.
Right. Since we're here with a subject that is very broad, life under lockdown is practically what, everyone in the world is speaking about now. I thought we could go narrower. You're someone who's long believed that we'd be a great deal more cheerful if we learn to be a little more pessimistic. So I want to use the lockdown as a lens to look at what I think is one of your most provocative statements, and you've had many, that optimism is the greatest flaw of the modern world. So let's talk about, what led you to value pessimism as you do? What was the line of thinking that kind of came to this?
Look, I really value the question and the thoughtfulness with which you've approached this. I mean, look, my feeling is that for most of human history, human beings were very alive to the fact that life is either cyclical in nature, in other words, that progress always leads to regress, and essentially you either stand still or even sometimes move backwards, but you don't necessarily progress. In spreading from Europe, Northwestern Europe, in the middle of the 18th century and then becoming a global phenomenon, what has happened is, thanks to the power of science, we have changed that mentality. We essentially nowadays all have an Enlightenment mentality. In other words, we place faith in reason and we place faith in science. And we believe that if enough emphasis is placed on reason and science, we will be able to liberate ourselves from the essential pains of the human condition and become the happy creatures, the carefree creatures, even, and this is what's happening in Silicon Valley, the immortal creatures that we have long dreamt of, that we would be able to become, that we will be able to unhook ourselves from the chains of human suffering. Now, this is a very beautiful idea. The question is it true? And is it therefore a useful idea? Look, it's my belief that the human condition is a little bit more, if I can use a particular word, tragic. And what I mean by tragic is subject to forces of fate, chance, and accident, which we do not control, which will always outwit the mighty but ultimately limited powers of our reason. And that we will, all of us, at some point be humbled, at many points perhaps, but we will ultimately always be humbled in the end by the forces of death. And that this defines the parameters of every life. Life has a tragic structure. Now, the ancient Greeks knew this. The ancient Hebrews knew this. Much of the Christian world knew this. Christianity is baked into the system. The Hindus knew this. The Muslims knew this. The Buddhists, definitely. I mean, think, what is the first rule that the Buddha tells us? Life is suffering, and on and on goes. So most societies, until the modern era, have understood what, you could call it pessimism, you could call it realism, you could call it a tragic awareness. But essentially, the feeling is that to be human is to be very alive to danger and suffering. And from this is the root of charity, both towards ourselves and towards others. This knowledge that every human that you meet is subject to the same forces, the same unjust forces, in many ways, is the root of fellow feeling. And look, in many ways, we've done away with this system. The modern world does not really operate with this system. And it causes us a remarkable number of difficulties in a remarkable number of areas. Let me pick just a few. Think about romantic relationships. The way in which we approach romantic relationships nowadays is that we imagine that romantic love is the business of finding one very special and also very perfect human being who we will admire because of their extraordinary qualities. And that this is what love is. Love is finding a unique soulmate who will be our best friend, our confidant, our sexual partner, our co-parent, our business manager, everything rolled into one, and they will be the total answer to loneliness, etc. Now, this is lovely, and it also makes us so intolerant. You know, it's funny how nowadays often lovers will call each other angel as a sort of, you know, funny sort of nickname. I say, Angel, will you, get some water from the fridge for me? And it sounds like a joke and almost like a coincidence. It's not. We have literally pulled angels from the sky down into the human realm, and we expect to find them and maybe marry them. It sounds beautiful, but it's a recipe for the most terrible intolerance. Because if you've put somebody in the status of an angel and they happen to have an annoying habit or chew their cereal in the wrong way or have an annoying mother or something like this, then, the only answer is an intolerant complaint, bitterness against the unfair conditions of your life. So the more, in a strange way, we are able to see suffering as written into the contract of existence, the more across frustrations large and small, we may be able to find reserves of patience and tolerance within ourselves.
Right. So let's leave religion aside for a bit, because you have a whole book on it. You have a book on what atheists can learn about pessimism from religion, and what they can learn from religion in general for a better life. But I want to speak about, you've said that the Stoics and the Danish philosopher, more contemporary Kierkegaard, are some of your favorite schools of thought or your favorite philosophers. Can we speak specifically in terms of the Stoics and their idea of negative visualization and preparing for the worst, and how that didn't mean that they were bleak, despondent people, how they really valued joy and hence prepared for the worst? So can we kind of put that in the context of a contemporary situation, because I think that could help explain what you're saying.
Of course, so the Stoics are fascinating because their advice for anxiety is not what we would nowadays advise. So if somebody comes to you nowadays and says, I'm worried about losing my job, I'm worried the situation may get very bad, etc., etc. What is the first thing that a friendly person is taught?
Don't worry.
To do, which is say, don't worry, it won't happen. Okay,
right.
And this is the way that we think we're being nice to people. Now, the Stoics would tell us, no, this is a recipe for driving up anxiety. Because the thing to do is not to focus on the chances that only the good will happen. The thing that really brings calm to our hearts is to examine with perspicacity and courage what might happen if the worst came to pass. And the bet of the Stoics is, if the worst came to pass, it would be endurable. It would be survivable. So if you think, I'm going to lose my job, what would happen next? Well, rather than running away from that thought, go into the thought. Go deeper. Okay, so we have to do this, and this would happen, and then that would happen, and then that would. And all the time you're being asked, would I be able to endure? And much more than we think, the answer is, well, look, it wouldn't be great, but yeah, okay, I suppose I could do this, and then I could do that, and then the other would happen. It wouldn't be fantastic. And the Stoics would systematically put themselves through thought exercises. Literally, if I lost an arm, there are some dialogues where Stoics in ancient Rome are going back and forth. If I lost an arm, what would it be like? And what would it be like if I lost a leg? And if I lost two arms? And if I lost my family? And on it goes. And ultimately, the other thing is, what would happen if I had to die? And the Stoic view of death is, it's survivable. Not that you will literally have an afterlife, but it can be borne. It can be endured. Many people have walked over this threshold before, and you will simply be another one. And so rather than running away from the specter of death, make yourself at home with it. Almost face it down. Go, okay, what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is that I will die. And there's a certain kind of invulnerability once you've faced up to this thing. I was watching that Ken Burns documentary on Vietnam that he did a few years ago. There's an American Marine who's talking about it. He's talking about being in one of the worst firefights in American military history, all night under Viet Cong fire. And he said, I've never been afraid since. I was so scared that night, he said, that ever since, nothing has ever frightened me again, because I know that nothing can ever be as bad again. And even if it is, it's okay. Even if dying is okay. I saw most of my friends die. Right. And so this gets to the heart of what the Stoics are trying to do for us. It's not a philosophy. It's not a joyless philosophy. It's not inviting disaster. It's trying to bring about peace of mind through a thorough investigation of the negative. And let's just say, those who have been able to contemplate darkness are very often capable of joy in a way that those who haven't looked at it are not. So this is not a philosophy of endless weepiness. You can laugh as a Stoic. You can take joy. You can dance. You can appreciate flowers. I mean, let's think about flowers for a moment. The interesting thing is that everybody over 75 loves flowers, right? There's not a single person in the world who's over 75 who's not interested in flowers and gardens. Whereas age 20, not that many people are interested in these things. And what's the difference? The difference is ambition. If you're a young person and somebody says, look at a flower, you think, why would I do that when I could look forward to my career, my advancement in society, love, new opportunities, etc. By the time you're over 75, many of these things have taken a hit. You're aware of the fragility of many things. Your ambitions have been narrowed by circumstances, etc. And you're not going to say no to a beautiful flower. And I think this shows what can happen once you're fully alive to the dangers that we're all exposed to, young and old, and start to appreciate these smaller things.
Right. So appreciating joy when you've known darkness, I think that's an idea that the poets through the ages have addressed. But I learned only recently that in contemporary managerial strategy, there's a term called pre-mortem, where teams are supposed to negatively visualize everything that could possibly go wrong with a project and then work backwards to fix it, rather than, doing a post-mortem when the shit has already reached the roof. What I want to ask you is that at the School of Life, which, apart from publishing books and doing the very cute videos, you also have over 1 lakh people who walk in through the doors, and there's, I believe, one-on-one or group counseling. What's the number one reason that people seek help for? Is it relationship? Is it business advice? Is it just being popular? What in your estimation is the reason that most people are unhappy today?
That's such a good question. I think that there are lots of local and different complaints that people bring in, but broadly speaking, I would say that the School of Life exists to address what I might grandly call the problems of modernity. In other words, the problems of existing in a world where technology, science, the situation around religion, around politics, around economics have conspired to create a whole range of social and psychological pressures that otherwise previous ages didn't necessarily know. So, for example, let me give you a flavor of this. Around the workplace, it might be the feeling that earning money is not enough, that you don't just want to earn money, you have something very precious inside you that you want to release and exploit in the world. And the difficulties that people have is, firstly, maybe this doesn't agree with what my family wants. Maybe there's a conflict between what I want to externalize in myself and what my family expectations are. And then there's a thought, literally, I don't know what my special vocation is. No one thought like this 300 years ago. These are very modern complaints, and we use a variety of kind of tools on this. In the area of relationships, very much the idea is, I thought this was my soulmate, what's gone wrong? Or where is my soulmate, what's gone wrong? And with a particular emphasis always on the psychology of childhood and its impact on adult life. I think all of us are aware that what happened in our early years shaped us emotionally, far more than other things, and that this continues to have an impact on who we choose, how we desire, how we relate to pressures and catastrophes in the external world, etc. So and to this we apply, various tools. And you began very interestingly at the beginning of our session. You said that I had said somewhere that books were not enough, and perhaps I should just explain that a little bit.
Right.
I love books. I'm surrounded by books. I adore them, etc. We're speaking in a book festival. So don't get me wrong. It's not that I have no respect for literature. I have the highest respect. However, I can't help but feel that a book on its own can only do so much. And in this, I've been very interested in the example of religions, because most religions have books in their center, but they also know that if you just leave people to read a book on their own, fascinatingly, interestingly, it goes in one ear, and after a few very charming and very enlightening and very important hours, it goes out the other ear. In other words, things don't stick. And if you look at religions, all religions are essentially machines for memory. They are essentially trying to rehearse lessons so that an idea which sounded convincing to you in theory starts to be applied in practice. At least that's the idea. So, most religions will get you up in the morning and they'll have you saying certain things, and they'll have you reading certain texts, because they know that what was clear at 8 o'clock in the morning will be diffuse and on its way to being forgotten by midday. And so there's a constant rehearsal, and there are festivals, and there are rituals, and there are clothes to wear and foods to eat and all the rest of it. And in a way, it's all education. Now, I'm not a religious person, and most of what, well, not most, but a lot of what religions teach, especially the supernatural aspect, is not for me at all. However, I admire these things as the most amazing educational machines, because they do understand something about human nature. For example, they know that part of what good learning is learning together. This is what this lovely festival has remembered. We could all be sitting on our own reading a book, but actually we've come together live, online, but live, because there's something about being together which helps the mind to absorb ideas. And that's something that religions have always known about. Religions also know, for example, that if you want to teach an idea, you put some food in there, right? Don't only have a lesson, have a meal. Have a meal and an idea together, and on it goes. Also, if you want to get an idea across, send somebody on a journey, put them on a pilgrimage. What religions call pilgrimage, we call traveling. But it's the same idea. Through an external journey, you will have an internal journey. Now, these lessons do not belong to education in the modern world. No one's really thinking in that way. And at the School of Life, we're fascinated by this. We're always thinking, what can we steal? It's not that we're a cult, because this is not at all what we're interested in. But how can we absorb some of these things? So just give you an example. We published a cookbook. A few months ago, we did a cookbook called Thinking and Eating. It's a selection of recipes, and we're looking at the role of food in ideas, so people can actually cook and eat together, and at the same time have certain psychological ideas. So this is some of what we do.
Right. So I think, on the subject of you and books and reading and writing, I also saw a BBC interview in which you said reading and writing was a response to anxiety, and your goal in raising your children is that they don't read a book. And I think most of the people tuned in today are readers, possibly some are writers. So are we just an anxious lot? Are we doomed?
Look, I think that reading and writing are some of the best responses to the anxiety of being human. But let's be clear, it often is precisely that, a response to the anxiety of being human. It's because things are so confusing. It's because connecting with other human beings is so difficult. It's because understanding ourselves is so mysterious and arduous. This is some of what makes the business of literature compelling. In other words, I think it's important to move away from an academic view that we read in order to know, and that we want to know just in order to know. No, I think we want to know because, life is a crisis. Even outside this particular crisis, we're always in a crisis of one sort or another. We're hurtling towards death in a tunnel without lights, not quite knowing what's going on, with a million choices to make, opportunities missed, enormous regrets, etc. It's always difficult. And some of what we seek from literature is solace, is consolation, literally consolation. We want to be able to put our own worries and ideas into some perspective through connection with the ideas and thoughts of others, and we want to be illuminated. And there's nothing more wonderful than a book which clarifies an aspect of your own psychology, which was mysterious until then, and you find a bit of yourself that is more yourself than you were ever able to identify in you in the work of somebody else. Books are virtual friends. Sometimes these books were written in 1450 in the other side of the earth, or 1900 by somebody who looked very strange, but somehow they are more plugged into your reality than anyone in your vicinity. So this is some of what books can do, and some of how I think we should be using literature.
Right. But what about literature not as a friend or a guide, but as art? I mean, even the Stoics believed in the importance of art in kind of achieving your a higher moral space. You believe that architecture and living in spaces that are beautiful is very important. One of your other ventures does precisely that, helps people experience good spaces. So what about the idea of literature not as something that's giving you wisdom, not as a friend or a guide, but just as art?
Look, I think there's a very strong modern idea that, it's art for art's sake, that we should not be pressing the arts to do anything for us. With huge respect, I don't share that view. For me, art is being invited to do something a little bit more vital. Now, this doesn't, I don't think, strip it of any of its value. In fact, it aids its value. I mean, the way I look at it is a lot of what we might call art is seduction. And what I mean by seduction is to get an idea across into our minds is a difficult challenge. And some of what artists are doing, I mean, let's take the visual arts. Let's take Florence in the Renaissance. So suddenly in the Renaissance, there are amazing pictures. Some of the most beautiful pictures that the world's ever seen get painted in Florence in the Renaissance. Why? It's because of the existence of a Platonist and scholar called Marsilio Ficino. Now, Ficino, who'd read Plato and was friendly with a lot of the artists like Botticelli, etc., understood from the Greeks that in order to try and make people wise, you can't just deliver a lecture. You can't just stand at a pulpit and frighten people and bore people, etc. You need to invite art. If you like, you need to invite beauty to be the handmaiden of wisdom. It could sound rather odd, but that's precisely what all the great painters of that time thought they were doing. That's what all the great architects were doing. They were using the majesty of painting and architecture, and then, of course, music, in order to lend luster to ideas which might otherwise be interesting in theory, but impractical in practice. And so they entered our hearts deeply in order that they be effective in the world. Now, this sounds odd today, because all the arts of seduction have nowadays been split off from the realm of ideas. So take fashion, for example. Fashion is commonly taken to be a low genre with rather sort of, lacking in ideas, right? Or design. This is not a sort of high realm, right? So we've separated off the art of beauty from the art of wisdom. Now, I think quite passionately that what we need in order to make the world convincing is not that the comedians and the people who are making amazing TV shows, etc., are in one corner and the philosophers are in another. We want a unity of the arts and of thought so as to make the best ideas most convincing. And it breaks my heart. I have friends, wonderfully clever people who will write a book on justice, for example, and a fantastic book on justice, how to make a more just world. But it's 700 pages long. It's got footnotes, many of them in German. And the total readership of this book is maybe 800 copies. And you think, my goodness, there is no more important topic in the world. And this book is going out to 800 people. Meanwhile, there are people who are making television shows with audiences of, 100 million. And what I want to do is to put these people together so that they can achieve something together.
Right. Alain, since we're nearing the end of the session, I feel we have to speak about Proust for a bit because, that was your book on Proust was one of your early successes. And I think what the book distilled is very relevant to, the times today. So Proust's thesis that because we only think when we are distressed, we shouldn't worry about striving to be happy, but should kind of like wallow in a state of, being productively unhappy. How does that kind of fit in with the idea that people are coming to the school of life to seek help? Shouldn't you be telling them, be productively unhappy, you don't need a quick fix? Or how does that relate to, you know, the kind of urgency of today when a 25-year-old today wants a fix to a problem? They want it now. Can you really...
Look, I think that the trick of life is not to be happy or unhappy, but to make whatever mood you're in work for you. And there are moods of anger, of frustration, which are nevertheless part. They fit into, you know, a good life. Let me say one thing about Proust, something else about Proust, you know, because it's fitting for the lockdown. Proust himself was in lockdown. For the last 15 years of his life, he rarely left his room. And so he really is a man for our times. And the interesting thing was that he argued that our heads contain already the most unbelievable memories, impressions, sensory, evocative powers, and that most of the time we don't go into our minds. We are permanently seeking the outer world, whereas we already contain the most extraordinary machine for taking us into experiences. And so he was somebody who would lie awake in Paris in the beginning of the 20th century, remembering his childhood and moments of beauty in nature, moments of happiness that he had tasted. And he uses his imagination to go there. And he believes that most of us are so literal. We always think we have to take our bodies somewhere in order to go there. And as a true writer, he understood that no, it's the imagination, it's the power of the imagination that really brings us joy. And it's through the journeys of the imagination that we can get to see some of the most valuable lands.
Right. I think the power of imagination bringing us joy is a good note to end the Q&A part of this session. We have some audience questions now, so I'll read that out. The first one from Swapan Seth is, deciding to avoid other people does not necessarily equate with having no desire whatsoever for company. You once said that. It may simply reflect a dissatisfaction with what or who is available. So has the lockdown been the reluctant social sparrow's finest hour?
I mean, look, I think more than anything, what the lockdown suggests is that there is a real difference between physical proximity and psychological connection. Now, we sort of know this in general. We know what it's like to be in a crowd, but feeling alone. But I think the current situation throws an emphasis on that. And it really encourages us to seek out genuine connections. And as I said at the beginning, I think a genuine connection is one where you are able to reveal your vulnerable human self. And we can do this arguably as well when we're locked up in a room through modern technology as we can when actually surrounded by people. But again, as we're in a literary festival, let's mention that our books are really our virtual friends. I mean, this is what it means to really love a book and love a writer. It's to have a sense that this is your friend. Remember Holden Caulfield in The Catcher in the Rye said the definition of a good writer is a guy that you can feel like you can call up on the phone and have a good chat about the big about the big problems of life. And I think that is true. I mean, you may want to call up a Stoic philosopher. You can't, but you have that sense. And that's, I think, what it means to be connected, have a feeling of connection with a writer.
Right. I read that you don't like small talk. Your idea of a great conversation is a friend from Australia calling you and saying, asking you some really deep questions straight off the bat. And that's your idea of a good conversation with a friend, right?
Yes. I mean, that's not to say that it has to be an abstract conversation of a dry kind. What I simply mean is using conversation to try and advance ideas is, I think, for me, one of the great pleasures. If two people, sometimes on your own, you can't work everything out, but getting another brain to plug into your brain and to think together about a problem or about an issue or about something that's confusing is, I think, one of the great joys. And that's what I see friendship really being for. A friend is someone who helps to think with you about the dilemmas and joys and agonies of being human.
Right. There's a question here about travel, and I know travel is of special interest to you. You were once the writer in residence at Heathrow Airport. I don't know if that was a role that was made specifically for you. But this question from Sachdev Ramakrishna is, how should we travel in a post-COVID world? Not how would we travel, but how should we? So what are your thoughts on that? How do we change our idea of travel?
Yeah, I think we have to define what travel is. I think rather than saying that it's about going to a particular place, I think what we mean by travel is a mindset. Now, normally that mindset is defined by appreciation and greater curiosity than we give to the normal circumstances of our lives. So when you say, I went to Europe, I went to America, etc., I went traveling. What this means is I went through the world with my eyes particularly open, alive to the world's beauty and interest. Now, the painful thing is that we could do this at home. One of my favorite books is by a French 18th century writer, Xavier de Maistre, who wrote a kind of shaggy dog story, a charming shaggy dog story called Journey Around My Bedroom. And it was the first anti-travel book. And really what Xavier de Maistre was saying is, if you decided to go on a journey around your bedroom and you approach your bedroom as if it could have some of the wonders of Paris, of Berlin, of Tokyo. If you took a traveling mindset to your own locality, my goodness, the things there that you would see would amaze you. Now, the people who can really show us how to do this are children. People under about 3 years old, well, they're like Martians, aren't they? They've arrived from another planet, and they are so curious about everything. So a journey, to the end of the road, to the shop, something becomes a miraculous thing. They see so much. They see an ant, and then they see a puddle, and then they see a little bit of earth, and the whole thing is fascinating. And my goodness, we get spoiled. With age, we lose our capacity to be amazed. And I think if you want a definition of an artist is somebody who refuses to lose their capacity to be amazed. That's the connection between them and a child.
Right. There's a question here from Simran who asks, one thing that this situation of the lockdown teaches us is that humans are not in control. What can we do to accept and absorb this concept better, this concept of not being in control of everything that's happening around us?
Well, I think rather than seeing it as an insult to us, if one can see it as a lesson, a kind of wisdom, and this was, again, we're talking about pre-modern and modern societies. Modern societies see themselves as in control, and every incident of out of control is an offense. It's a humiliation. Ancient societies or traditional societies have always seen the notion of being out of control as baked into the whole business of being alive. So I think what we can do is to remind ourselves that this or that injustice, this or that frustration that we personally are going through belongs to a much larger category. It doesn't even belong to the category of, COVID-19. It belongs to the category of being a human being on a planet which we didn't create, which we don't fully understand, in a universe that we're only, can understand only an infinitesimal amount. So the night sky, every night, you just throw your head back and you look at the stars, and you are being given a gentle and dignified reminder of your own tininess and insignificance in a larger, mysterious realm. Now, far from this being a depressing thing, it can relieve the ego from the pressure which it normally feels to assert itself, to try and establish its dominance. This is an exhausting business. So to feel small and powerless is oddly not just a humiliation, it can be a route to peace.
Right. Alain, there's a question here from Sarah, which I think, if you've seen, judging by social media posts, it's a question that people have been grappling with both ways. There's a sense of performance anxiety in times of lockdown, because there are some people who claim to be, doing 2 hours of yoga and baking this perfect cake and learning Mandarin and learning sign language, and there's all of that. And some people are just trying to figure out how to get through the day because there are additional chores, if kids to look after, take your dog out for a walk, whatever, all of that. So Sarah asks, how should one cope with the feeling of not being productive enough in this time? Any advice from you on how to limit anxiety and take us back to the feeling of flow?
Yes. Look, know that if anyone is suggesting that their life is invulnerable and perfect, this is a facade. It's very hard to believe, because all you have is the evidence that they are giving you, and the evidence is heavily edited. And it's designed to humiliate. Consciously or unconsciously, it's designed to humiliate. That's certainly its effect. And so bless these people, but they should have their fun in other ways. And as I say, the greatest gift is to be honest about your life. That is a gift. You know, our concept of what a normal life is still lacking so many of the details because we don't dare to share what it's actually like. But I think one of the responsibilities of writers is to reveal a little bit more about what a marriage is like, about what a working life is like, about what a life and a death is like. That's what writers do. They expand on the media and advertising and the neighbor's view of normality, which is often a very abbreviated thing. And it's a generous act, and we should practice it, whether writers or not. We should practice it in our own lives. Stretch the concept of normality.
Right. We have a minute to go, and I want to end with one of my questions again. But what are you doing or writing, and what is the School of Life? Are you preparing a special kind of post-COVID coping package, or what is it that's keeping you busy now?
Well, I've just started work on a little book, which I'm going to do through the School of Life, which is called Varieties of Melancholy. Now, melancholy is an interesting word. It's not rage. It's not happiness. It's not bitterness. It's a mood that I think is very important to us because it suggests that it is pain well handled. To be melancholic about the world, you're neither furious nor are you grinning sentimentally. You're aware of the pain, but you're on the side of smiling and laughter, even though you know that there is suffering either that's been or that will be coming again. So I think it's a wise approach. And, you know, maybe this is the philosophy that we need for our times. Not a philosophy of despair, certainly, not a philosophy of mad Silicon Valley optimism, but a more ancient philosophy, the philosophy of melancholy.
Right. Would you say it's a kind of spiritual sequel to your book on Proust because it's going on the same lines of...
Yes, in a way. I mean, everything is connected, but like my work on Proust, it's again trying to show how a focus on the so-called small and an appreciation on the details of life helps to console us for the greater troubles that we're never going to be insulated from.
Great. Thank you so much, Alain. I think we have Sanjay here to close the session. Thanks for the conversation. I'm sure it'll be very useful for all the questions that we've gone over today. Thank you.
Thank you, Alain de Botton and Anindita Ghosh, for that brilliant, beautiful session. And I do hope everybody is sort of breathed in and relaxed and let go some of their angst and their additional energy in this very crazy world. Please do remember to log back on Friday, the 11th of September, and join us for a fabulous weekend of conversations, discussions, and debates over 3 days as we present JLF London 2020 at the British Library from 11th to the 13th of September. To check our fabulous program on our website, jlflitfest.org, and remember to register online at jlflitfest.org. We continue to bring you great conversations and fabulous exchanges for all of you to be part of free. Please do remember to log in on Friday. See you then from London.